All right, so it's now 12:45, so hopefully some more folks will kind of trickle back in from lunch. But we are going to go ahead and get started with our first afternoon session for the historic preservation and housing track called New Tools for Evaluating the Fiscal Impact of Housing in New Hampshire. Um, I have three speakers with us today. George Regan, who's a community engagement manager at New Hampshire Housing, uh, and then Ethan Connor Ross, um, and who's an executive vice president and principal at eConsult Solutions Inc. And finally, Stephen Madsen, who's a director at eConsult Solutions Inc. Uh, just for kind of a brief overview of the session, um, again, the title is New Tools for Evaluating Fiscal Impact of Housing in New Hampshire. A common refrain when a new housing development is proposed in a community is that the increase in demand for municipal services and schooling from the new housing development will outweigh the increases in property tax revenue and broadening of the tax base from the development. In this next session, new tools for evaluating the fiscal impact of housing in New Hampshire, George Regan will highlight the results of New Hampshire Housing's recently published study, From Homes to Classrooms, the relationship between housing development and school enrollment in New Hampshire. Then Ethan Connor Ross and Stephen Madsen from eConsult Solutions will showcase PEA's new fiscal analysis of housing's fiscal housing calculator and walk through the development of this tool. Collectively, these new studies and tools show that how much a housing development will be revenue positive or negative for a community is dependent on the housing type, location, and the number of new students generated by the housing type, which is just one part of helping a community understand its long-term fiscal resilience. And now I'm going to turn it over to George. George, take it away.
Great. Thank you, Noah. Great to be here today with everyone. I guess we're glad it's raining out still because we now have something to do inside. Anyway, just wanted to talk about our study, which many of you might be aware of, that came out in 2024, from schools to classrooms, from homes to classrooms, I'm sorry. Looking at sort of that persistent debate about the relationship between housing development and school enrollment, and that'll increase property taxes. And so I'm gonna touch on that, but just for a second, just want to talk a bit about New Hampshire Housing. Many of you know that New Hampshire Housing is a self-funded public benefit corporation. We promote, finance, and support housing solutions for the people of New Hampshire. We've got home ownership programs. We administer some of the housing choice voucher program to create, make sure that folks have stable, affordable places to rent. And we finance about over 1,500 units last year of tax credit multifamily affordable housing. So we believe in that work, and also we also believe in investing time and resources into publications and research like the one I'm going to talk about today. Before I get into the study today, this isn't the first time we as New Hampshire Housing have been trying to look at the information and resources and research about this relationship between new construction and school enrollment. And this has been, as I mentioned, an issue that's been debated for a long time. Oftentimes I'd talk to folks and be saying, yeah, our school enrollment is increasing. And I would often go to the Department of Education website, look at the housing enrollment data for their area for like 10 years and just see like it's just not really happening. So reality isn't the same. But yet it's an important one to try to make sure we provide information and resources. So we had been working with Russ Tebow from Applied Economic Research since like the mid 2000s, looking at sort of, this relationship and what is happening. And certainly one of the big things that was occurring along the way is that our school our demographics are changing a lot. So not only Russ looking at things, but also Dr. Richard England, who was a study was commissioned by the New Hampshire Association of Realtors, really dug a really deep dive into looking at all sort of schools and SEUs around the state, and kind of looking at places with enrollment increasing or decreasing, and sometimes having an increase in taxes, sometimes having a decrease, and not necessarily related to whether there's more kids in the school system or not, which I find interesting. So just kind of getting into a bit of a high level piece of housing and school enrollment and demographics. Since 1995, and so we did this study with Urbanomics, by the way, and this study, there's a one-page fact sheet, thankfully, because it's about a 60-page document chock full of great information for those that really want to pull apart the layers of the onion and get into like how we got to some of the numbers I'm going to mention, of which I am not an expert, because I still refer back to sort of the fundamentals of all the work they did to look at school enrollment, looking at decennial census data, looking at information from National Center for Education Statistics and other places, as well as the case studies that I'll talk about in a second. But since 1995, we have an overall increase in school enrollment of a little over 15%. The same time, about a 29% increase in the population. And indeed, our population is projected to grow over the next few decades, and then slowing down. But at that same time, a significant decline, and really even since before that, because Russ Tebow found this as well, that births are just decreasing at almost 15% decline in birth rates. So that's important to think about when we're looking at housing and school enrollment. And so, getting into it itself and sort of examining what those issues are, we look at it sort of as a three-part myth, right? And I was mentioning about folks talking about their school population increasing, and often, and understandably so, with the amount of young kids going through school systems from the baby boomer generation, kids of, and then millennial. There was definitely a time when the school enrollment was busting at the seams, but that, as mentioned, has been just dropping off significantly. So one of that myths are the school children per unit, and often less so now, but it still comes up that people are assuming that there's always, with new construction, there's going to be two kids per unit. They're going to be enrolled into the school system, and that's just really not true. I'll mention it again, but really, um, we've been looking at sort of a decline, like I said, a decline in school enrollment since the 90s, from like 0.39 to 0.29. So 0.29 overall kids per unit. And then our case study communities, which I'll talk about, is 0.25 school kids per unit. So nowhere near that two number. So when you think about that, if you had a 100 unit development, we'd be thinking that, well, there's 200 school kids. When reality with the 0.29, it's something like 29. Now that's a huge difference when you start to think about what is the real impact on my school system, the need for resources, and then what it means in my property tax bill. The other really important thing, often, we talk about, well, it's $10,000 per student or 15,000 per student, which is really taking the number of students in a school system and taking the overall school budget and then just coming down with that per unit or that per school child cost. But we know that that's not really the case, right? If we add a couple of more children in, we're not necessarily going to add 30,000, 45,000, and so on to the school budget, because largely our school budgets are fixed costs, right? So cost for personnel, cost for health insurance, all of those other things, building maintenance, and all of the other things, versus the marginal costs. And think about a school system, again, which many are facing declining enrollments, that there's capacity, number one. So if we take those same students and add them back in, if you got a classroom with capacity and a teacher that's already teaching, well, then one could argue that there's really not 15 or 30,000 more dollars being added, but potentially really the marginal cost may be somewhere closer to zero or a very small amount. And I think that's really, really important. So I would just urge, as we think about looking at our own school systems and costs, that it's kind of an oversimplification just thinking about it as that whole school budget and dividing by the number of school kids. So just wanted to talk about that, and that's definitely a myth that we talked about. And then certainly finally that we may not think really that some of these that all of these new construction are going to add some amount of money to the tax base. And this is where housing type and density is really, really going to make a big difference. I'm going to talk about it in a few slides later, but overall, the net fiscal benefit from new construction in our case study communities was 1,711 per unit. And that's significant also even compared to older construction pre-2014, where it was about 190 per unit. So I'll get into more of that. So part of this study, as I said, used decennial census, but also we wanted to go into 4 case studies so that we could kind of dig down into what the reality is, right? So sometimes the bigger numbers, well, that's not my situation up in my community or wherever else. And indeed, the 4 case studies isn't going to be completely representative. But what we tried to do to bring some of the finer points about the school study and new development to light was to try to find some communities to really dig deeper in. And so just wanted to share with you that sort of wasn't just a random, throwing darts at a map. We were trying to look at community characteristics, looking at places that have new construction happening, number one, perhaps having an increase in school enrollment, number two, so that we could be kind of reasonable in looking at that and trying to find geographic diversity. We came up with a list of about 15. It got winnowed down mostly just because of the respect and sensitivity for trying to share data sharing from schools. And there's a lot of certain important safeguards around that. And so that got us to our 4 communities of Deerfield, Dover, Dunbarton, and Merrimack that we were able to look at. And so looking at that, this is some of the information that we found. So again, talking about the general overall since 1990 of school enrollment across the state of New Hampshire going down to 0.29 students per unit. This is new construction, so 2014 to 2023, and looking at the number of students per unit now. So again, thinking back to the conventional wisdom of 2 kids per unit, we're down to 0.16. And essentially going across there, single family has been and continues to be sort of the predominant housing type that produces the most students per unit. Even with that, again, going back to the 100-unit sort of single family detached development, that would still be about 40 students per unit, right? In multifamily housing, 0.06 or 6, and then in manufactured housing, shocking 0.01. And I think that's important in light of just the importance of manufactured housing and trying to have attainable housing that you can own that actually appreciates in value. And so I think that's a real significant thing to look at. So when we're thinking of new development, whether even single family, but multifamily condos like townhouses and manufactured housing, it's important to realize that the impact in terms of number of school kids is just far, far less. And so what does that mean in terms of looking at, sort of what the overall tax revenue is, and then is it contributing enough to covering the school costs? And so looking again at the new construction case studies impacts, we looked at the net value. So I mentioned the 1711 for all housing built between 2014 and 2023 in new construction in those 4 communities, Dover, Dunbarton, Deerfield, and Merrimack. And so, and looking across, seeing that the difference also in value per acre as well. And we wanted to have them use this kind of language to incorporate, and I'll show in a next slide, the going back to the work that was done with Joe Manicosi and Urban 3 a few years ago, back in 2020, looking at the sort of tax productivity of different kinds of housing types, from single family to mixed use, multifamily, and looking at what that tax generation is or value per acre. I also think it might be more reasonable to talk about things as net value as opposed to just school costs and kids. And so I think that what this essentially shows is there is a positive net fiscal benefit. And as you see on that slide, net value refers to the overall fiscal impact of new housing on a school district, calculated as the difference between the additional tax revenue generated and the total cost of providing educational services. So what Urbanomics did is they looked at the tax bills in these towns and looked at the piece that's just for school costs. So this is relating to just for the school costs and looking across. And the interesting thing is I look at multifamily rentals and single family, there's not a big difference per unit, but when you look at it per acre, same with condos and townhouses, it's certainly far more potent, and part of that simply goes down to the density of the developments there. So when you look at higher density, there's more units per acre. So while maybe per unit it's comparable to single family, there's more opportunity to generate to the school cost, just based on the number of units and density that's there. And so because I wanted to, mention urbanomics and just bring it back to that, and certainly there'll be more discussion about this, but housing types when I'm finished, is just taking a look at urban three. So as again I mentioned, they did a statewide analysis a couple of years ago, but one of the case study communities is Dover, and so one of the units or one of the places they looked at, meaning urban three, was Point Place, which is a part of a new mixed use development in South Dover. And this is one of the things they use. So this was Point Place mixed use development. So there's restaurants, retail, other things on the first floor, and then there's residential above. And so there's 156 units on that. And because we didn't have this study out, using the 2012 school enrollment study from Applied Economic Research. So he was applying the 0.17 students per unit, which came out to 26.5 students. And so this property is a little over 3.5 acres. And so when you look at it, when they looked at the overall taxable piece of that, the value per acre is a little over $5 million. And so they were looking at that and saying, okay, well, if it's generating a tax bill, is there a net fiscal positive or not with the number of school kids in terms of being able to pay the tax bill and contribute to other municipal services in the community? And again, it doesn't look at our new study, which really, as you saw on the previous slide, mixed use is 0.06 or 9 students as opposed to the 26. And so what he pointed out, just using the 2012, was that the taxable value per student per acre in Point Place, using again 2012 figures, was 7 times that of single family residential development. So it's maybe not always going to be the same. You see Red and Garden there. That's an older development, which is multifamily. It's not mixed use. And so location matters, density matters, how much is being developed on a piece of land. And I just want to conclude with thinking about some of the myths and misperceptions around the number of school kids, but also recognizing that, where school kids, the units they're living in, is variable, and location matters. Even in our 4 case study communities, especially Deerfield and Dunbarton, which are more single family, detached, there were more school kids per unit overall. Deerfield was 0.42 and Dunbarton was 0.58. And, the tax revenue per student per unit was somewhat less because, again, it was more single family and lower density. So it certainly speaks a lot to policy related choices about the types of housing development that a community thinks about, what that means in terms of school kids, and what that means in terms of paying your portion of the school bill, but also having enough to invest in municipal services that cover the growth and the fiscal health of your community. And so just a reminder that study, plus a lot of other research and publications, that as Sarah Reitzman says, we've got a guide for that. So we always try to make sure there's information and resources that you can use to dig deeper into questions or issues you have around housing in general. And so with that, I know that I am done, and I will turn that over to Ethan, or whoever is going to start.
Thanks, George. And our kind of presentation segue nicely here because we've done similar work that we'll step through with you here with myself and my colleague Steve Madsen. So just quickly, my name's Ethan Connor Ross. I'm a principal at eConsult Solutions based out of Philadelphia. And we are a consulting firm that does economics and public policy, and in particular, planning issues related to land use and development. So I was the project lead, and Steve was the project manager on a recent study with Noah and his team at New Hampshire BEA. And we have recently launched a calculator that looks at illustrative developments and how they impact local budgets from both the revenue and expenditure side. Noah kind of set this up at the beginning of the session. The context here is the housing need in New Hampshire that everyone's aware of, and the concerns about the fiscal impacts of and implications of meeting that need. And George just did a great job of stepping through some of the ins and outs of this. And of course, location matters, housing type matters. And what we've tried to do is build a tool that works in a flexible way to really any community and to a set of housing types across the state. And in order to do that, we had a number of methodology decisions we had to make to kind of set it at the right altitude to give that kind of flexibility and coverage. So the tool that you're about to see and step through, it's not parcel specific, and it certainly doesn't replace the need for site and project specific studies when you get into any individual development. But the idea is that it does produce results that are representative of differences in municipalities and kind of how their revenue and cost structure works, both at the municipal and school level, and differences in housing types in terms of how they affect revenue generation and expenditures. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Steve. He's going to take you kind of behind the curtain in a few slides on how it was constructed, what goes into it, and then actually demo the tool, which you can also check out yourself. It's live on the BEA website.
Great. Thank you, Ethan. Like Ethan said, my name's Steve Madsen. I'm a director at eConsult Solutions. We've been working closely with the BEA team and the OPD team in particular on this fiscal housing calculator. Really excited to have it here and to be with you guys today to kind of walk through some of the specifics and methodology choices that kind of went into it, and then provide a bit of a walkthrough of how that tool works through a live demonstration. So just to kind of pull back a little bit, again, I think Noah at the very top of this, and then George before me did a really great job of kind of talking about what the thought here was going into creating this tool. A fiscal impact analysis really tries to just understand the revenues that are associated with a particular development and the expenditures associated with the households inside that development. So from that 10,000 foot level, we're really trying to, like Ethan said, provide that level of scale. So folks who are kind of before they're going into the actual development cycle themselves, if they are curious to kind of interact with the different dynamics that impact these numbers, both either net positive or net negative, understanding how certain choices along the density scale have some effect inside creating this tool, and knowing that we were trying to create something that allowed users to interact with selections of municipalities, the size of a development, the density of a development. And when we say the density of a development, we're thinking about a single family typology, a middle density typology, which would be representative of a duplex, triplex, quadplex, and then multifamily developments, which would again be 5 or more units in a development. What does it mean for a town when these developments are moving forward from an illustrative example? So what we tried to do to kind of do this efficiently and at that appropriate level of detail was to create both municipal typologies and housing typologies on the back end. Again, users are making those kind of key selections on the front end of the tool, as you'll see at the end here. But what those selections do and interact with are essentially municipal typologies that are groupings of towns that are created together on the basis of a few different key characteristics that where there are similarities, we try to push together towns on the basis of population density, the available public services, and the municipal budgets of those towns from a quantitative and qualitative perspective to create town profiles that would allow us to create per capita expenditure estimates on the expenditure side, and then assessed value per square foot and assessed value per acre estimates to interact with those selections that the users are making on the front end. That ended up creating a bunch of different municipal typologies, 7 in particular on that side. And then again, on the housing typology side, we tried to look at rolled up assessed value parcels and really land on those different building types that you see within the state's available parcel data, and then created those typologies at the high level, again, single family, middle density, and multifamily density, and then subtypologies within them, knowing that certain housing typologies, such as age-restricted housing or workforce housing, is another particular need in New Hampshire, and there are assessed value differences between these typologies as you make those choices. Moving on to the next slide. And again, to kind of walk through how this all works to create a number that allows us to create that net impact figure. A user is making kind of 4 key selections here: a municipal selection, a housing typology selection, a housing subtypology selection, and a development size selection. Again, so in theory, that would be a user selecting something like Durham, then selecting middle density perhaps, then they wanted to look at perhaps market rate buildings, and then in particular, let's say 20 for instance, and we'll kind of like run through what that looks like in the back end. But what we've done is calculate the the land value and the building value from those choices based on the assessed value figures we were seeing out of the parcel data, and applying the local property tax rate and the local school property tax rate to create an estimated property tax revenue that would be derived from the development. On the expenditure side, we looked at the available census data and other kind of studies done by New Hampshire Housing, among others, where there's a good amount of information that would speak to, again, the size of the households that are going to be living in each of these like illustrative developments. Again, what we're trying to capture here is just the size of that household, the number of school children in that household, and then applying those numbers against the per capita estimates that we derived out of those municipal typologies referenced earlier on a marginal basis, making sure that we're trying to understand then on net the revenue that was created from the development and the likely or estimated associated municipal services cost attached to those folks inside the developed units. A couple of unique things just to very quickly talk through. On the there essentially were a couple of choices we had to make along the way as we were thinking about this to make sure that we were kind of capturing the reality of development as you were moving forward with these types of choices, and to properly represent the numbers kind of when we got to final figures. On the revenue side, we had to create a land value premium, which essentially is a value over the vacant, the median vacant cost or a value attached to that type of parcel, dependent on the density selection made by the user. On the expenditure side, we made 2 additional kind of features that are unique to this model. Broadly, the economic literature out there would speak to how the additional density or the growth in density in municipal locations generally tracks with a downward trend in the per capita cost of municipal services. So the model kind of assumes as density increases inside a town based on the selections made in the development, that marginal basis or marginal addition of new cost actually goes down as with each additional person added in the model. And then kind of on net, we created a cost that would be placed on single family developments over one, right? Essentially saying that anything that was not infill development had a subdivision cost attached to it. Again, that would be the likely addition of infrastructure costs or road maintenance that would come with a larger subdivision that would be attached to single family or middle density home growth. And then some very key limitations about this model, again, just to kind of pull back a bit. This model does not assume a specific location inside a town. Location, as George referenced, it's very important that value per acre increases as you choose more dense locations inside a town. And then also very importantly, the data that we are working with is static. We tried to use the most recent assessment value, the most recent budget figures from the municipalities from across the state. There is some lag there. And on top of that, just important to note that the figures that we're using are the most recent tax rates, but the budget figures are, I think, as recent as 2023, inflation adjusted to match the most recent tax rate year. What you're getting on the back end of the model, or this would be, I suppose, the front end now. What you're seeing on the right-hand side of this slide here is what comes after a bunch of decisions made by a front-end user. So again, the user is selecting a municipality, a type of development, the number of units, and all that stuff interacts with the associated estimated assessed value that we created from each type of development and the estimated municipal services attached to that development. As those come together, the revenue side, if it is greater than the services cost in the example that you're seeing on the right here, you'll see that as a represented net positive impact represented by the green figure. If it was negative, it would be red. In that case, where municipal services are higher than the tax revenue. And then we break that down at the development level to the unit level. And then on the bottom side here, on the bottom right-hand corner, we also have created a taxpayer fiscal impact analysis to show what the impact would be to the homeowner of a median-priced single-family home in a town, in the town selected by the user. So really what this is saying and assuming is if the development, again, illustrative, was developed and placed back into the tax rolls, assuming nothing else changes, no changes to population, no changes to any other tax rates, what would that mean for the tax payment on an annual basis for each developed unit that was added? In this instance, this would be kind of interpreted as that property owner of the median price single family home would be paying 17 less cents per each unit added by the development chosen by the user here. Probably easier to show this again through a live setting. So that's what we're going to do here. And I think now we're going to jump over. I'm going to switch my screen here. So please just hold with me to make sure this goes through all right. And just before I go forward, Noah, does this show all right?
Yep. We are seeing that. Yep.
Okay, great. So just to kind of walk through what users are seeing, there are, we have tried really to create this tool with the front end user in mind. And that means a lot of folks, whether it's just community members, local stakeholders, local elected officials. We wanted this to be a tool that was useful to anyone and everyone at that kind of very preliminary stage of trying to understand what additional development or additional residential development would mean for your town. So what we've done here is create a landing page that places some of that thought in context. again, just speaking to the need for new housing across the state of New Hampshire. And then on the right-hand side, just kind of talking about the different types of housing that we are looking at in this study, right? Single family, middle density, and that multifamily typology. So the tool pushes you through here and allows you to hit a little button. So we're going to hit the button. And it pulls you to the calculator. What we've done is kind of create a link to the user guide. So in addition to the tool that you're seeing here, we have a user guide and a technical memorandum that's attached to that if you kind of want to dive into all of the bells and whistles that are attached to some of what we were thinking. And if you want to take a deeper dive into the methodology and some of the numbers that are attached to the model parameters, all listed there for review for those that want to interact with it. The way the calculator works here, again, there's 4 key selections. And what we've tried to do is have people think about it in a kind of a numeric sense. You choose your municipality, your number of units, your housing type, and your housing subtypology. So in this example, I'm going to choose Durham, a town I'm sure many here know well. On that first selection, you're going to see some very kind of typical municipal profile pieces of information and statistics here, just referencing the population, the current housing stock, the median household income of Durham. And again, these are all kind of, we have little kind of hoverable points that will kind of reference where that data is coming from. And then down here on the left-hand side, we have that new housing, new unit needed, estimated by the regional planning commissions. Again, referenced here, that's the projected need from 2020 to 2040. So understanding that, let's say in this example, we want to select 20 units. The tool allows us to select any of the housing typologies here. So again, we're going to select middle, multifamily, or single. Let's in this instance choose single family just for illustrative purposes, and then we can just walk through each of the differences there. And we want to look particularly in this instance at market rate. We can start there. What pulls up on the right-hand side is, again, those net figures that I was talking about, that unit figure that I was talking about, and that taxpayer fiscal analysis on the other side here. So by choosing 20 units of that single family typology of market rate housing, you're seeing here that the estimated municipal services cost is higher than that estimated municipal tax revenue derived directly from the development. What we're doing here to get that per unit cost is just simply dividing the larger number here by that 20 units that was selected by the user. And again, on the other side here, pulling in and assuming nothing else changes when you add this back to the rolls, the median priced single family homeowner would be paying on would be paying $1.11 more per unit of each added development of each added developed unit to the rolls here. To just kind of like walk through the different selections of density that go on here, knowing that there's kind of like essentially from how the model was set up, different typologies and different numbers interacting on the back end. We'll just kind of erase the selections that we made here, and it'll pull away the different choices. So we can stick with 20 again, just to kind of show how this changes over the choice of different density selections. I think in that last model, we chose single family, so we'll just kind of keep going up that density scale and choose market rate. And then showing here, again, a tax revenue estimate and a service cost estimate, where the estimated net impact is higher than the service cost estimate. So again, in this instance, rather than the single family example, we're seeing that this version of 20 units is has a positive estimated net impact. And similarly, that shows on the taxpayer fiscal analysis side as well. So again, the regular or median tax homeowner would essentially be paying less for each developed unit selected here. Then just to show multifamily density to get to that highest level of scale. Still positive, but a little bit less than what we were seeing on that other selection there. So what I'll do here is just kind of erase that. And I think, Noah, unless I'm just like looking at the clock here now, I want to save some time for Q&A as needed. So I'll stop sharing if that's easiest, or shift back over to.
Yeah, why don't you just leave it up? Just leave it up.
Okay.
That'll be great. Whoop, can you bring it back up again, please?
Yep.
Maybe.
Yep, there it is.
We're still seeing your desktop.
How about now?
There you go. Perfect.
Great.
Great. So we do first have some questions and comments in the chat. I think, George, you did a pretty good job of trying to answer some of them. I'm just going to go through. Hold on. Let me open the chat again on my other screen. There we go. So first of all, I'm going to go back up and just see what George entered a bunch, but I just want to make sure we got through them all. So we had some comments. I'm not going to read all the comments. Those are comments. Okay, so I think we have a question in here about middle density. Does middle density also include a cluster subdivision?
I think the simplest way to answer that is not no, which is maybe not the most clear way of thinking about it. Really, we're thinking about this when we tried to roll up on the back end the parcel level data was building types that were essentially representative as those attached townhomes, duplexes, triplexes. In certain instances, if you were selecting, anything more than 5 units of that middle density selection, very likely you'd be using more than one parcel of land. At that point, it would become, in a way, a subdivision. So not directly, that wasn't implicitly on the back end described, but what we've tried to do on the front end, or through the development of the model more generally, we did try to apply that subdivision cost to the middle density housing when users select a number or a unit count greater than 5. So we are seeing some additional cost applied there when you are kind of assuming a larger or less efficient use of land on that particular typology selection.
Great. Thank you, Steve. Okay, great. Thanks. I was going to tell you, we're hovering over and we were seeing other boxes, so they went away. Thank you. I am actually going to go back just for posterity for folks that aren't listening to this live, and who may not have access to the chat, to just kind of read through some of the chat questions and notes and George's responses. And Steve and Ethan, feel free to chime in as well along the way too, as you see fit. So we got when we're talking about the school costs and costs per student, I think an interesting point was made that cost is billed to a town based on per student costs. So in some of the school districts, and Steve and Ethan, I know we chatted about this at length, that have kind of joint school districts that cover multiple towns, the town is billed right for the students from their town. And so George said to that degree, in those instances, George, being George Regan, responded, in those instances, housing type and density and value per unit per acre of housing types will be important to review to ensure your town has generated enough revenue to pay the tax bill. Because of anything to add there?
Not really. I know that's sort of right, different than a lot of stuff, but it still comes down to when you're looking at your housing typology, housing policy, what are your choices that are there? So I think it's a great point. That's the one thing when you're tuitioning people in, it's a different. I assume that's what that sort of means. It's just a different. It is a different animal, but and so therefore the school enrollment study that shows school kids and things like that are important information as Hollis Brookline folks are looking to say how do we cover those costs? That's all I got.
Right.
Thank
you.
Can I jump in, Noah, and talk about how
Please.
it's sort of addressed in our model?
Please.
Yeah, and George's point about average versus marginal and as sort of a general statement is really important. And this is another one of the challenges of doing a tool that kind of works on a statewide basis, and obviously it changes in different municipalities. But what we have tried to do to kind of address this average versus marginal cost question, we do use average costs on a per pupil basis for each of the districts, and that was available on kind of a uniform basis from the state. But we are only looking at the local tax contribution to those students and to that cost as a cost associated with a new development. And the key distinction there is a certain amount of the school tax revenue essentially gets sent up to the state and then a portion back out, and there is some redistribution related to that formula depending on the income of the town and some other factors. So essentially different municipalities, because of that system, pick up different shares of that overall average cost. In some cases, local tax revenue might be accounting for 60% of an average cost per pupil. In other cases, 80%, whatever that is. So the calculator's got all of that baked into it. So essentially, while we are using an average cost framework, and we're saying that a new student overall is essentially in line with the existing cost structure, the local increment on a new student isn't necessarily that, and in fact is calculated for each municipality as some lower number that reflects the share of local taxes to the overall per student contribution. So this is, again, a method that you'd want to refine in looking at the particulars of any school district and any particular site, but gives a pretty good reflection of, in our view, the tax base implications for new students.
Great. Thank you, Ethan. So I think we entered that cluster section. All right, the next point that was made was about manufactured housing. Was that manufactured housing itself does not generally appreciate in value unless they are located on their own parcel of land or part of an owner development and George responded kind of about like a resident-owned community in a kind of larger manufactured housing park. The structures themselves depreciate. George, I don't know if you want to speak a little bit more about kind of you talking about rocks and how rocks are an example of a value of manufactured housing appreciating.
Yeah, I mean, I think number one, I think the person who's commenting, I think we're on the same page, right? That when you're in a resident-owned community, as an example, you're able to potentially get conventional financing, but also that we've seen that the value actually appreciates. Like that's been seen in resident-owned communities. So that's where the people have either because it was privately owned, purchased the property, and now we're sort of self-governing like a house, like an HOA. So, I mean, I think that we're in agreement. I think it's really important to look at, especially, I think, as I mentioned, it's one of the last bastions of sort of attainable, ownership housing, even though you're like a condominium, maybe you're not, owning the entire land, but you own your unit. So there's not much more I think I can say about that. They definitely do appreciate. Rocks are just a great example of an opportunity to be in a place where you're controlling costs and actually have a housing unit because it's not chattel, right? It's actual real estate, which is unique. In a lot of other states, manufactured housing is not considered that. It's considered a piece of real estate, and therefore you're able to. And that's why in some cases, if it makes it through the Fannie Mae kind of certification program, can be you can get conventional interest rates on it, which is fantastic. So.
Great, George. Steve and Ethan, do you have anything to add on that one? I I know we didn't really address manufactured housing in the calculator. Cool. All right, so I did just ask folks if there's other towns that you would like, these are towns that you'd like Steve to kind of pull up and we can go through. We do have plenty of time still to kind of go through some more examples, as well as any other questions folks may have. Otherwise, I'm just going to start giving Steve different towns to kind of look at. I got one. All right, great. Tim would like to see the city of Somersworth.
Sure.
Right. That's a great one.
That is a great one.
Hey, great. So again, the selection of a town pulls up the municipal profile and the estimated housing need as found by the Regional Planning Commission for Somersworth. Again, the model will kind of push the user to select a number of units. We let folks choose the town. Do they want to choose the unit count as well?
Yeah, sure. Tim, if they want to give, say, 20 units, perfect.
20, weighing in at 20.
Great. Any other? We can just give the full readout.
Right. You want market? You want
middle, multi, single.
Right, and you want market or workforce or age restricted. We cannot do well, you can talk about the town. Actually, that's a good question. Do you want to address the townhouse thing, Steve? I think that's a good. That we didn't really talk about attached single family.
So attached single family is, I would say, it would fall under single family in this model, unless there is specifically, the way we rolled up the parcel. It would be assumed, unless the building types within the parcel data kind of indicated whether it was a single unit property. So if it was clear to us that we were able to indicate that it was a single unit, single household property type, such as attached single family homes, that would have fallen in the single family selection. Not to say that it's a very similar from like an architectural typology choice, middle density, right? So the middle density home is really only capturing from the assessment data on the back end those units or those building types that have explicitly more than one type, more than one household in it, or more than one unit inside the building. So again, that's that 2, 3, 4 type of building, which could be attached or detached. We're not necessarily saying per this selection, it's automatically attached or detached. It's just saying that by choosing this selection on density, you are seeing a single unit if you're choosing single family, or if you're choosing middle density, it is a building that has 2, 3, or 4 units inside it.
There was then a follow-up question there about, okay, understand that. Can you now talk about the definition a little bit more of middle density versus multifamily? Just clarify that.
Yeah, so the middle density typology rolled up building types that, again, were that buildings that had 2, 3, or 4 units in them. We kind of determined that on the basis of square footage and doing some of that parcel level analysis to really understand the buildings to the best that we could. There is a multifamily building type inside the parcel data, which was at least very helpful for us to kind of build out that typology. I'm sure as folks on this call are very well aware, the multifamily housing is not very diffuse across the state of New Hampshire, right? It's very kind of, it's very focused within the state, just more broadly inside kind of the areas closer to Manchester, Concord, Nashua, that bottom right corner side of the state. Not to say that there's not multifamily across the state. There are examples of that, but knowing that the N count was a little bit smaller on some of the multifamily typologies as we were putting them together for those areas that were less dense or where just multifamily housing is just less likely to occur, at least historically. We had to supplement some of that data with public data and private data where possible, and at times pull in data from other parts of the state to kind of bring up that N count a little bit more and kind of support the assessed value figures that we're using in the back end. Again, to speak to just how that multifamily typology came together, that's really going to be anything from a 5-unit property that could be 2 to 3 stories in theory, illustratively, right? But we also do, just to go back a second, we do allow choices all the way up to 100 units, right? So that, again, in a multifamily instance would be one, most likely one parcel, most likely one building. In some instances, illustratively, we're not saying necessarily how many buildings there are, just simply that selection has 100 units of multifamily types of units. Does that kind of clarify that a bit, Noah?
I think so. Tim had a follow-up thing about more than 2 family is multifamily. I think he's referring to, I don't know which, if you're talking about Portsmouth or Somersworth, R1, R2, R3, R4. I guess the other point I would make, and George, you can chime in with this too, is that we tried to align the definition of multifamily housing with the state's workforce housing statute, which defines multifamily as 5 or more units.
That's right.
Okay, let's see. We still have.
So let me at least make the
okay. Well,
choices
okay.
too. Yeah,
here.
we'll do that while we.
So I think, and this is what I expected. Tim is coming at this from a building perspective.
Yeah.
And yes, the International Building Code, the IBC, and the International Residential Code, the IRC, do have clear definitions of these. That is absolutely correct. We are talking about this right now, really from for the most part, a zoning perspective in terms of how many units are in a dwelling. Again, going back to the workforce housing statute, defining multifamily as 5 or more units for the context of zoning. Understanding that building codes and those that live in the building code world is a separate animal. George, others, I don't know if you have anything else to add on that one. Tim's asking if that's in the definition. The definition of multifamily, I will pull up. I believe, George, is that in 674-58? I'm testing you, but
it doesn't define it. It actually just says for it to be considered workforce, it has to allow multifamily of 5 units or more. So it doesn't say that multifamily is therefore defined as 5 units or more, but it's saying for workforce multifamily to be considered workforce, it needs to be 5 or more units. 674, 58, 61. So somewhere it's in there.
Yeah.
He's talking about 676.
I see that. Yeah.
Okay.
So I don't know. 676 is about administration enforcement of the land use statutes. So, Tim, we might have to have a conversation offline. I don't know. Happy to do that. I'm not sure exactly which.
But I would just say, much like the workforce housing law, it's not trying to look at international building or residential code and looking at that kind of definitions. It's again, you guys are trying to do this as a way for people to make as a guide to make useful decisions about their housing policy, right? And so I think that's at the crux of it. And the way you've chosen to look at the data is to say, because as you and I were talking in, weeks or a month ago about your model, it's like, what does workforce housing mean? What's imbued in that? Because, the house I live in could be workforce housing dependent on what my income is, right? But the house is the house. It's taxed as the house. So you're trying to find ways to put things into clear enough, I want to say buckets because I can't think of another word, and it's raining buckets out, to help guide, further conversation and policy decisions, right? And my point place decision, it's like, then when you get down to the granular level, you can understand how things really tick.
And we were going for simplicity as much as possible in the choices that the user is making. And I know looking at this, the screen now, there's a number of things on there, and we are trying to provide a lot of information, but it is intended to be straightforward to the user. There's only 4 things they have to answer, but even can answer, and it's sort of not free form. You're suggested into a certain number of choices in order to make sure that not just planners and policymakers, but somebody from the general public, could interact with this and could get something out of it. But I think, George, you described it well as a planning tool and an indicative tool of, you could put in sort of different project type specifications and get a sense for how they're playing in terms of revenues and expenditures. And again, not replacing the notion that, if a true project is going to be built in a specific location, it should still have more study to that, and this number shouldn't be taken as representative of every project of that nature.
Great. So I'm going to suggest maybe, Steve, we look at another example in a area that I know has higher tax rates and lower assessed values.
Sure.
Let's look at Claremont, because the numbers are different.
You have a choice, Noah, on number of units?
Let's do, I think you can do all 3 options at 40 units. Is that correct?
Yep. I believe so. Yes, you can. So we'll start with single.
Sure.
Just keep it on market rate for now. And then I'll just kind of
walk
go
through
ahead,
that.
Noah.
I was saying, you want to walk through that?
Yeah, sure. So again, municipal profile and estimated housing need comes up with a town choice. What you're seeing from the single family selection with 40 units attached to it, again, market rate, you're seeing here that the tax revenue exceeds the municipal services associated with households inside that development, right? So this development choice of 40 units of single family at market rate would have an estimated positive net impact of approximately $94,000 when broken down to the per unit level. That's again for each per unit created here in this illustrative development. You're seeing approximately $2,400 of net positive impact, or estimated, tax revenue exceeding by approximately 2.4 per unit. Again, that would then see tax savings for the median priced homeowner inside that town, assuming that development re-enters the tax rolls, assuming no other changes. So what I'll do here is just again walk through the density scale and just kind of keep going up.
Steve, it might be useful to switch it over to a workforce or age restricted too, and kind of illustrate that.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll go back to single family for a second. And again, just to show the difference between market rate and workforce. And again, like I said, during the build up to this, you're really by choosing the housing subtypology, that's not impacting the expenditures. That's really only impacting the assessed value figures that we were looking at. Very subtle differences between the assessed values of workforce homes versus market rate homes. They're just they're very, very small. As you kind of build up, obviously that subtle difference becomes larger with each with growth. Again, you're still seeing though a positive or positive net impact here, where the municipal tax revenue is exceeding the associated or estimated municipal service costs of the development, whether you're choosing workforce or market rate.
Yeah, and as Steve said, the expenditure profile is the same in this model on workforce or market rate. There is a slight difference with the age restricted, where that's going to affect the number of school children and the assumption on school children per unit, but also going to affect some of the service costs in the other direction. So age restricted has a slight difference on the expenditure side, whereas workforce does not relative to market rate.
Just a question about the workforce, just as I'm hearing you talk. I think you said it has a different assessed value. And what's your methodology for getting to that? Because that sounds like there's some covenant that's saying it's workforce housing, and therefore, perhaps just tell me, if you can, a little bit more about the methodology that changes the assessed value.
Yeah, so we operated under the assumption that there was like a form of deed restriction on the land impacting the value or the overall assessed value of the property. The assessed value of affordable homes or workforce housing homes is usually pretty mostly on net the same as market rate. But on the land itself, the value can be slightly different. So really what you're seeing it is on the land more so than the building itself.
Okay.
George, does that answer your question?
I think it does. I'm nodding my head.
Okay.
Yeah, from a high level economic standpoint, it's sort of basic that if you've put a restriction, on that land, on the ability of what you can do with it, there's sort of definitionally some small detriment to the value that comes off that. So, there's different studies on this. There's different examples you can look at, but we did feel it was appropriate to put in there some sort of small level of discount on that.
Yeah, and I think we've gone back and forth a bit, even in New Hampshire housing, because in a lot of the deed restrictions, for it to be financeable, a bank needs to have an escape clause where that if it goes bankrupt, that it needs to be able to be sold at market rate so they can recoup their. And so it became this conversation about, well, I get it from one standpoint. It'd be great if there's an assessor on board to weigh it. Well, they can't weigh it, they can't talk. So it'd be a 5-paragraph answer. But I understand why your methodology. So I appreciate that.
So we got another really great question. Others besides Tim, please feel free to put questions in the chat. I know some folks have had trouble accessing the chat. I think hopefully we resolve that. If they didn't, my apologies. Go ahead, George.
Oh, I was going to say, in addition to Tim, just so he doesn't feel like he's sidelined. These
Yes,
are good
exactly.
questions.
We've got some really great questions. There's another really great question from Tim. As I read the definition, again, going back to multifamily and going back to the middle density, won't a big piece of the equation be municipal water or not? More than two family needs a full sprinkler fire suppression to comply with the state fire code. Without town water, the needs for cisterns, fire ponds, or waterfront locations would be prohibited. Was this puzzle piece part of the calculator?
So I can speak, I think, broadly to utilities here, Noah.
Please.
So the utility costs that are generally assigned to a bunch of households across the state, it varies whether they are municipal or privately backed, and following those dollars as they are assigned, they're generally, at least from our research, were kind of applied on a private fee or a simple fee basis rather than as an actual taxed fee. So we kind of made we kind of built it into the model to kind of knowing that there's so much variation across the towns. We just left it on the outside, knowing that most towns that was assigned, seemingly assigned on a per fee basis rather than a tax basis. So if that fee was kind of going to a private source or kind of like a third party municipal adjacent source when it was assigned and then paid for by the household, we just kind of kept it on the outside of this analysis and just kind of had it as its own private side rather than trying to work through the weeds of all the different outcomes that could potentially come up by making all of these different municipal selections.
Awesome. And I will just add a kind of piggyback on what Steve just said, is that this is really just looking at Tim, I think your question is well taken. I think there's that kind of interplay between what is the municipal cost and what is the developer cost, right? So to some degree, I think obviously there's a significant cost associated with sprinklering when go to more than a two-family building. You're absolutely right about that. There's this whole other point of this calculator is really focused on the municipal cost, whose responsibility it is to provide that water, and the cost of that water for that sprinklering is kind of a whole nother, to Steve's point, philosophical conversation, which is kind of beyond the scope of this calculator. If that makes sense or helps. Ethan, Steve, I don't know if you have anything else to add there. Or respond to what I said.
I was going to make the same point. It is this calculator is not a development feasibility calculator in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, and Tim is saying the same thing. It's not the product, the install, it's the ability to provide the water needs. Yep. Understood. So we have about 5 minutes left. I think we've had a really good kind of demo and good conversation. Do folks have any last questions or want to see one more town? I don't think we've seen the numbers for an age-restricted development yet. So maybe we could look at that. Maybe let's pick one more town. Let's go through one more town. Why don't we look at, let's see, we did something on the seacoast. We did something, somebody wanted to see Keene. So why don't we go over to the city of Keene for a minute?
Sure. So let me unselect that. You can tell I've been doing my New Hampshire work since I knew how to spell Keene. All right. So let's go with 40 in this instance. And again, we're going to choose at least, we're going to start with multifamily here and then go down to age restricted. And rather than just kind of like walk through again what we're seeing here, I think that's pretty clear. We're seeing that net positive impact broken down at a bunch of different levels. This was a particular focus, I think, for us out of the discussions that we had with Noah and his team, knowing that New Hampshire is facing a kind of a growing and aging, that aging population is growing in New Hampshire significantly. So we wanted to make sure that there was a way for folks to think about and consider what comes along with that age-restricted housing. Again, making some of those same assumptions just to make sure that we're following the regulatory framework for how age-restricted housing is considered in New Hampshire.
Awesome. And I will just add there that housing for older persons, age-restricted housing over 55 or over 62, it can mean a lot of different people to different things to different people. We were really focused on, as Steve said, what's in the definition. It really focused on kind of those independent living units that aren't providing kind of other services, like when you start to go to a higher standard or level of care, like assisted living or memory care. So just to clarify that.
And I'll just further clarify that because I know we talked about it, that with our aging population, the natural course isn't to say, well, I'd like to go live in an age-restricted living community, but I do understand why that a developer may want to do that and someone may want to live in that.
Yeah. So in our 2 minutes left, Steve, why don't we look at how the numbers change when you go from being age-restricted to, say, just being regular market rate?
There you go. Let's get rid of age restricted. Sorry, my biases are coming forth.
So we've gone up from what total or estimated net impact?
Yeah.
I think
Mm-hmm.
78 to 94. Yeah.
78,000 to 98, 94 and change.
Mm-hmm.
And that's primarily driven by the school children assumption going down a little bit.
Correct. And I don't know if we spoke about this, but there is some level of offsetting factor, right, between the number of school children going down, but also that the number of medical calls by fire and EMS going up to age-restricted developments. Cool. Well, I think we're just about right at time. This has been great. For folks that are still here, late on a Saturday, we really appreciate it. George, Steve, and Ethan, thank you so much for sharing part of your afternoon with us. And Steve and Ethan, thank you for kind of giving this first kind of promo of the Fiscal Housing Calculator.
Yeah, nicely done. Yeah.
And well, so thank you all. And we're gonna now. I have to reshare my deck, so it's gonna take
I
a
was gonna
minute.
say I'm gonna stop sharing.
No,
Noah.
don't. I will just
No,
reshare over.
Nope,
Dump,
don't.
up.
Okay.
That's what I do. Remember the
Yeah, I
chastisement
remember.
I got from Noah last
Yeah.
time?
I'm not gonna touch a thing.
All right, so I'm gonna make sure I got my correct version.
Steve, the only
here.
thing worse is if you would put your Knicks hat on the way out of the.
Yeah, that's right.
I am still wearing orange. I'll give. I will say that.
Are
I
folks
love it.
seeing the slides again with the break slide?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I think we're back in business. We're gonna have a 15-minute break now. For those hardy souls that are still with us. I don't know why my colleague Alvina just put her hand up, or maybe she was agreeing. And then we'll have our final session of the day for the Housing and Historic Preservation track, Balancing Housing and Farmland Conservation in New Hampshire. You will have to all subject yourself to not only listening to me as a moderator, but also a presenter for the next session, as well as Ellie Brown and Jamie Potter. And that will round out our conference for today. Thank you so much, all.
Take care.